She thought it was just a quiet weekend getaway, a romantic dinner, a glass of wine. But as she fell into a deep, unnatural sleep, her husband stood over her holding a syringe. With shaking hands and a racing heart, he rolled up her sleeve and did the unthinkable. What he injected into her arm wasn't just a drug. It was a secret that would destroy everything. And the reason? It's darker than you could ever imagine. To the outside world, James Whitmore had everything a man could want. He wasn't just rich, he was iconic. A tech genius who built his billion-dollar empire from nothing but code and caffeine in his parents' garage. Now, at 38, he stood at the peak of power, living in a modern glass mansion tucked into the rolling hills of upstate New York. The house sparkled like a diamond in the sun, cold, clean, breathtaking. But inside, something was quietly breaking. Elizabeth Whitmore, his wife of 10 years, was the type of woman that made heads turn, not just for her beauty, but for her grace. Her soft voice calmed boardrooms. Her warm hugs brought comfort to crying children in hospitals. She was elegance in motion, the heart behind every charity gala, the soul behind every donation James signed. Together they looked unstoppable. The magazines called them America's golden couple. Social media adored them, matching suits, weekend getaways, public kisses under chandeliers. To the world, their love was flawless, but the world only saw filtered photos. It didn't see what lived in the silence between them. 3 years ago, Elizabeth had suffered a miscarriage. She was 5 months pregnant, a baby girl. They had already picked out a name. Lila. It shattered her. And it changed James forever. The nursery had been painted soft lavender, with tiny gold stars on the ceiling. After the loss, Elizabeth couldn't bear to enter that room. She locked the door and a part of herself with it. Doctors told her she wouldn't be able to carry another child. They tried IVF. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time, Elizabeth's hope lit up, only to burn out in painful disappointment. They looked into adoption, but every road seemed to end in red tape and closed doors. Surrogacy brought legal complications, media rumors, and heartbreak. Each failure added another crack in Elizabeth's smile. At first, she cried. Then she stopped crying. She smiled less, spoke less. She began sleeping in the guest bedroom, saying the master bed made her feel like she was being watched by ghosts. James didn't blame her. He blamed himself for not protecting her, not healing her, not saving their dream. But he never said it. He just worked longer hours, took more meetings, drank more bourbon. He built new wings to the house that echoed louder with emptiness. Their conversations turned mechanical. Did you eat? Yes. Are you going to the fundraiser tonight? I don't know. Love hadn't disappeared. It had just grown quiet, heavy, like an old photograph fading under glass. James still kissed her forehead every night. Elizabeth still left handwritten notes in his briefcase. But the notes stopped saying, I love you. They started saying, don't forget your vitamins. Behind the smiles at charity balls and tech launches, there were 2 people standing side by side, but growing miles apart. He watched her from across rooms, studying her sadness like a painting he couldn't touch. She watched him leave every morning, wondering if he still saw her the way he used to, until one night James stood in the nursery alone. The lavender walls looked gray in the dark. He touched the crib with trembling hands, the dust whispering memories he couldn't silence. That night he made a decision, a secret decision, one born not out of hatred or lust, but desperation. Desperation to keep some piece of their dream alive, to give her a child, to save their love from fading forever. A decision that would change their lives. A decision the world would one day scream about. A decision so shocking it would make even the cruelest tabloids go silent. Because love, when twisted by grief, can become a storm. And James Whitmore was about to step into that storm. Without telling the woman he loved more than life itself. James Whitmore had always been a man of logic. A man of numbers, systems, and strategy. He'd built billion-dollar software that ran global security platforms. Solving problems was what he did. Quietly, ruthlessly, and without error. But no algorithm could solve the ache in his chest. No technology could fix a broken womb. And love, real, deep, painful love, wasn't something that could be rebooted. Every night he sat on the edge of their California king bed, watching Elizabeth sleep. She looked peaceful, but he knew her rest was never truly restful. Her face twitched. Her hands clutched the blanket like she was protecting something invisible, something that had already been taken from her. He'd heard her crying in the shower. He'd found the old ultrasound tucked inside her nightstand. The name Lila scribbled in the margins of a journal she never let him read. Elizabeth's pain wasn't fading, it was swallowing her. And he was losing her, slowly, one silent moment at a time. Then came the obsession. It started small, research articles, fertility blogs, private doctors. Then came deep web forums, underground options, dangerous whispers. The desperation grew fangs. He didn't want just any child. He wanted her child, a baby born from her soul, someone who could inherit her laugh, her compassion, her light. If she couldn't carry it, maybe someone else could. But Elizabeth had already refused surrogacy. She'd said it felt like cheating fate. She refused donor eggs. "Then it won't be mine," she whispered one night, her voice barely a breath. James didn't sleep for 3 days after that. He sat in his home office, staring at the blinking cursor of a blank document. And then, just like that, the idea came. A sick, wild, outrageous idea. Not a donor, not a surrogate, but a stranger with her. Not out of lust, not out of betrayal, but to save what was left of their love. He hated himself for thinking it. But once the thought arrived, it refused to leave. It took root, grew legs, became a plan. That's when he met Marcus. He found him by accident, scrolling through a street music blog late at night. A man singing at a Brooklyn subway station. His voice was raw, gritty, soulful. The caption read, "Struggling musician trying to raise money for his sister's leukemia treatment." James couldn't explain it, but something about Marcus stuck with him. There was sorrow in his voice, truth in his eyes. He tracked him down in less than 48 hours. They met in a coffee shop near Prospect Park. Marcus looked tired. His hands were rough, his clothes worn. James ordered him an espresso, then dropped the offer like a brick. $2 million, tax-free, no strings attached. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "For what?" James looked him in the eye. "I want you to get my wife pregnant." The words hung in the air like a crime. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "Man, are you out of your mind?" "I'm completely serious," James replied. "She won't know. You'll pose as a fertility doctor, 1 session, then you walk away." Marcus stood up, ready to leave. But James pulled out a photo of Elizabeth. Marcus paused. She was beautiful, but not in a glossy magazine kind of way. She looked sad, fragile, real. "I don't want to hurt her," James said softly. "I just want to give her something I can't." Marcus sat back down. He asked questions, a lot of them. What happens after? What if she finds out? What if the baby doesn't look like either of us? James had answers, legal documents, contracts, NDA agreements, DNA manipulation tricks. He had thought of everything, or so he believed. After days of silence, Marcus agreed. Not because of the money alone, but because of his sister. She was dying, and the hospital bills had buried them. This wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. The plan was set. A weekend getaway at the Whitmore's private lake house. Elizabeth would be sedated, just lightly, a muscle relaxer hidden in her wine. Marcus would arrive under a false name, Dr. Henry Wallace, an elite fertility expert brought in for one final experimental treatment. 1 night, 1 act, then it would all be over. James told himself it wasn't betrayal. It was love in its most painful form, a sacrifice. But love, when twisted by guilt and obsession, can turn into something else entirely. And deep inside, a storm was beginning to brew. Because the heart, even a broken one, knows when it's being lied to. Marcus King had grown up in shadows. The shadows of hunger, of hospital waiting rooms, of long nights holding his little sister's hand, watching her fight a disease that didn't care about her laughter or her youth. Music was his only light. He sang in subways, played guitar on freezing street corners, and sometimes slept in his car, his heart wrapped in melodies no one ever heard. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a saint. He was just a man trying to survive, until the day James Whitmore found him. The offer had haunted him ever since. $2 million, 1 night, 1 act that would save his sister's life and destroy someone else's. For days, he'd sat in silence, staring at the contract, rereading the fine print. He told himself this wasn't rape. It was a deal, a transaction. She wouldn't remember. She'd never know. He told himself lies until they sounded like reasons. But his stomach never stopped churning. He had met James twice before the night of the plan. The billionaire's cold confidence made Marcus feel like a disposable tool. A part of him hated James. His privilege, his calm, his twisted desperation dressed up as devotion. Still, Marcus said yes, because his sister was coughing up blood, because eviction papers had arrived, because sometimes morality is a luxury the poor can't afford. The night came fast. The lake house stood like a silent giant by the edge of a still black lake. It was the kind of place Marcus had only seen in movies. Glass walls, velvet couches, marble floors. But no warmth, no life, just cold beauty. James met him at the side entrance. No words were exchanged, just a nod and a key. Marcus's hands trembled as he entered the house like a thief. It was midnight. The storm outside had begun to whisper through the trees. The air was heavy with silence and something darker. Elizabeth lay in the master bedroom, the moonlight falling gently across her face. Her skin glowed like porcelain. Her lips barely moved with each breath. She was breathtaking, but not in a romantic way. She looked real, human, like someone who had cried too many times and forgot how to hope. And in that moment, everything inside Marcus broke. He couldn't breathe. He stood frozen at the doorway, the papers clutched in one hand. He was supposed to approach her, make it quick, emotionless, professional. But how do you do something unthinkable to someone who looks like they've already been hurt enough? He took one step closer, then another. Her wedding ring sparkled faintly on the nightstand. There was a photo beside it. Her and James, smiling, but her smile was older than her face. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at her, and she seemed like a ghost. Not dead, but not fully alive either. A woman frozen in a life she didn't ask for. Caught in a nightmare she didn't know was still unfolding. He whispered an apology she couldn't hear. And then he got up, walked into the living room, and stared at the fireplace for hours. What was he doing? What kind of man would he become if he went through with this? He thought of his sister, her laughter in the hospital bed, her belief that he was the good guy. He thought of Elizabeth, how she'd wake up and never know what had been stolen from her. He couldn't be that man. Instead, he found a notebook and pen from the kitchen drawer. He sat down at the dining table and began to write. For hours, he poured everything into that letter. The truth about James, the truth about the plan, his own guilt, his tears, his weakness, and most of all, his decision not to touch her. He ended the letter with something she had probably not heard in a long time. You don't know me, and maybe you'll never want to. But I saw the pain in your silence, and I couldn't add to it. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Please don't blame yourself for any of this. The monster wasn't me. It was the man who pretended to love you and used that love to control you. He folded the letter and placed it on the pillow beside her. Then, without another word, he left. No money, no revenge, no glory. Just a man walking out of a house of secrets, back into the shadows, knowing that he had chosen to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. And sometimes that's the hardest kind of courage there is. The morning sun crept slowly through the linen curtains of the lake house. Elizabeth stirred, her limbs heavy, her mind foggy. The pillow smelled faintly of lavender and wine, but something felt wrong. Her head throbbed. Her thoughts were fragments, blurry conversations, laughter over dinner, the warmth of James's hand on hers. And then, nothing. She sat up slowly. The sheets were untouched, her clothes still on. And then she saw it. A folded letter resting on the pillow beside her, with her name written in shaky handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. A strange panic bubbled in her chest, something unspoken, something ancient. The fear that something terrible had been done to her, without her knowing. She opened it, and the world stopped spinning. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her breath caught. By the third paragraph, her hands were shaking so hard the paper crinkled in her grip. By the fifth, the tears came, hot, sudden, uncontrollable. The words were not poetic. They were raw, honest, heavy. Every line stripped away a layer of her safety, her reality, her marriage. I was supposed to violate your trust tonight, but I couldn't do it. He told me it was love, but love doesn't come in sedatives and silence. You don't deserve this. You deserve truth. Her body felt cold, then hot, then nothing. She was up in seconds, packing bags with wild hands. The clothes didn't matter. The toiletries, the jewelry, none of it mattered anymore. Her heart was a war drum. Her breath came in gasps. She couldn't scream. She could barely think. She looked around the beautiful lake house, the place James called a sanctuary, and saw nothing but lies built into stone and glass. She drove back to the city without stopping once. The second she reached their Manhattan penthouse, she burst through the doors. James stood by the window drinking coffee, pretending it was a normal Sunday. He turned and smiled. That smile shattered everything. Elizabeth, he said, stepping forward. You're home early. I was going to come. She threw the letter at his chest like it was poison. Read it, she spat. He looked down, recognized it instantly, and in that moment he didn't even try to lie. Instead, James cried. He collapsed onto the couch, his face crumpling in a way she had never seen before. I just wanted a part of you to live on, he whispered. I didn't know how to save us. You were slipping away, and I was losing you. I thought if we had a child, maybe we'd find each other again. Elizabeth backed away like he was something filthy. You drugged me, she choked. I know, he sobbed. I know how it sounds, but I swear I did it for love. No, she whispered. No. You did it for control. You did it because you couldn't accept my body the way it is. You did it because my grief made you uncomfortable. James stood, his hands outstretched, but she stepped back. The betrayal was too large to fit in the room with them. Elizabeth turned, walked straight to the door, and never looked back. She didn't speak to him again for months. She rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, sold her jewelry, gave away half of her clothes. She didn't want anything from that world anymore. The mansion, the charities, the public smiles, all of it felt like a mask she had been forced to wear for too long. But even as she tried to start over, something tugged at her. Not James. Marcus. His name echoed in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. He could have followed the plan, taken the money, vanished. But he didn't. He sat beside her and wrote her the truth. He chose honor over survival. She didn't know what he looked like. She didn't know where he lived. All she knew was his heart, and it haunted her. Not because he had come to hurt her, but because he had protected her, when the man who claimed to love her had not. So one cold November morning, she made a decision, not out of vengeance, not out of curiosity, but because something in her heart whispered, find the man who told you the truth when no one else dared to. Elizabeth had never been to Brooklyn alone before. Not without bodyguards, not without a chauffeur. But this wasn't a trip for comfort. This was a journey for truth. She clutched the address in her hand, scribbled on a crumpled envelope. It had taken weeks to find Marcus. One name, no phone number, no last known address. She called favors, contacted mutuals, dug through online forums, until a woman at a shelter remembered him. Marcus King, the one with the guitar, sweet soul. When she finally stood outside the building, her heart pounded. It was a small brownstone, worn, cracked windows, graffiti on the door. It was nothing like her world, but it was real. She knocked. Marcus opened the door with his guitar strapped to his chest and a confused look on his face. He froze when he saw her. Eliza Beth? His voice caught between shock and guilt. Yes, she whispered. It's me. A long pause filled the air between them. Awkward, fragile, electric. And then she did the last thing he expected. She smiled. I'm not here to accuse you. I read your letter, and I believe you. He blinked, unsure whether this was a dream or a trap. He stepped aside silently, and she walked in. The apartment was small, cozy, cluttered, filled with music sheets and broken dreams taped together with hope. There was a photo of his sister by the window. Her eyes looked tired, but she was smiling. I don't know what to say, Marcus said quietly. I thought you'd hate me. I thought I would too, Elizabeth replied. But then I remembered that you had a choice that night, and you chose to protect me. They talked for an hour that day, about the night at the lake house, about how she left James, about how Marcus had been living ever since, playing at bars, picking up side jobs, caring for his sister. He didn't want pity. He spoke with dignity, but she saw the struggle written in the creases under his eyes. That first conversation became a second, then a third. Once a week turned into every other day. Soon they were meeting at the park, at cafes, in quiet bookstores where no one knew who she was. They talked about everything: pain, grief, faith, race, the things people hide behind smiles. Elizabeth learned that Marcus had been stopped by the police 9 times in 3 months for walking. She learned that his sister was turned away from a hospital once because they couldn't afford insurance. She learned that even with talent, people often heard his skin before his voice. At first, it made her uncomfortable. But then, it opened her eyes. She had spent years organizing charity galas with glass champagne towers and designer gowns, claiming to help those in need. But she had never truly seen them. Not like this. Marcus never made her feel guilty. He didn't have to. The truth spoke for itself. And he, too, learned about her. He saw the woman behind the public image. The broken wife. The grieving mother that never was. The woman whose wealth never protected her from betrayal or heartbreak. They laughed. They argued. They healed. One evening, during a quiet rain, Marcus invited her into his studio corner. There were candles burning, and the room smelled faintly of old wood and mint tea. "I wrote something," he said, "about that night, about the choice I made." He strummed his guitar, and his voice filled the room. "I stood at the edge of darkness with nothing but fear in my hand. But I saw her, sleeping like a secret. And I chose to be the kind of man I'd want her child to understand." Elizabeth cried before the second verse. Not the kind of cry that asks to be comforted, but the kind that comes when your soul exhales after holding its breath for too long. When the song ended, she hugged him. Longer than friends do, softer than strangers should. And in that embrace, something changed. It wasn't about what happened in the past. It wasn't about James, or the money, or the scandal. It was about now. 2 people, 2 worlds, colliding not in violence or bitterness, but in unexpected tenderness. Over time, love didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It came gently. In shared coffee, in late-night texts, in the way she called him safe without realizing it. Marcus kissed her one spring afternoon in Prospect Park. No music, no fanfare, just truth. And Elizabeth kissed him back. Not because he saved her. Not because she owed him. But because in a world that had torn both of them apart, they had chosen each other, honestly, fearfully, completely. And that was the beginning of everything new. 1 year later, the world had changed. But more importantly, Elizabeth had changed. The woman who once wore silk gowns to galas, who waved from limousines and hid her tears behind tinted glass, was now sitting barefoot on the floor of a cozy Brooklyn apartment, holding a baby girl in her arms. Her name was Hope. She was just 3 months old when they brought her home. She had deep brown eyes like Marcus, fair skin like Elizabeth, and a head full of curls that refused to stay down no matter how gently they tried. She was perfect. Not because of her features, but because of what she represented. She had been born to a teenage girl from Harlem, scared, broke, and alone. A girl who made the hardest choice a mother could make, to give her baby a better life. Elizabeth met her at a small agency that specialized in open adoption. She didn't expect anything to happen that day. She went to volunteer, but when she saw the infant sleeping in a woven blanket, her heart whispered, "This is her." The process was long, filled with background checks, court visits, and more questions than she could count. But every page she signed, Marcus was by her side. He didn't need convincing. He had already decided this wasn't her child or his child. This was their daughter. The day Hope came home, Marcus cried. Elizabeth held him. And for the first time in years, she felt what she had been aching for since the miscarriage. Not a perfect life, but a real one. They were an unusual family by society's standards. A former billionaire's wife and a biracial musician. A baby who didn't look exactly like either of them, but belonged to both in every way that mattered. They didn't care what the tabloids said. They didn't care about whispers in grocery stores or side eyes from strangers. Because every night when they tucked Hope into her crib, when she cooed and reached out with tiny fingers to touch Marcus's beard or clutch Elizabeth's finger, they knew they had done something right. James watched from a distance. The scandal had made headlines. Tech billionaire's twisted fertility plot exposed. He lost board seats, sponsors, and friends. But what hurt more was losing her. Elizabeth had been his heart, even when he didn't know how to protect it. And Marcus, the man he once paid to steal something, ended up being the one who gave Elizabeth her life back. James didn't try to fight it. He didn't send lawyers. He didn't call. Instead, he gave. He liquidated much of his fortune. He opened a trauma recovery center for women who had survived sexual manipulation and betrayal. He funded therapy grants, built safe houses, and quietly met with survivors who wanted to talk to someone who once failed, but wanted to listen. It didn't erase what he did, but it was the start of something. Redemption. And when he saw a photo of Elizabeth, sitting on a park bench, Hope in her lap, Marcus's arm around them, he smiled. Not because he was happy, but because, for once, he understood that love wasn't about possession. It was about protection, and he had finally let go. Elizabeth and Marcus didn't hide their story. They were invited to speak at universities, conferences, nonprofit panels, not as victims, but as survivors. Their message was clear. Consent is not a gray area. Love without respect is control. Family is not always blood, and healing is possible even when trust is shattered. They told their story with honesty, about power, race, trauma, and the miracle of choosing kindness over silence. Elizabeth spoke of the pain of betrayal, but also the courage it took to forgive herself. Marcus spoke of growing up biracial in a world that treated him as both too much and never enough, until someone simply chose to see him. Their words moved people, not just because of what happened, but because of what came after. One evening, years later, Elizabeth walked into Hope's room to find her painting. A picture of 3 stick figures. One had brown curls and a guitar. One wore a dress and held a book. One had golden skin and a big smile. "What's this, sweetie?" she asked. "It's our family," Hope said proudly. "Because love makes families, right, Mommy?" Elizabeth knelt down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Yes, baby, that's exactly right." In a world that often divides, judges, and wounds, Elizabeth, Marcus, and Hope built something unshakable. A home, a truth, a choice. And people across the nation, across the world, listened. Because theirs wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a story about what we do next. About how the worst of humanity can sometimes lead to the best in us. About how color doesn't define love, but love can redefine everything. And in the end, one message echoed louder than any scandal ever could. Kindness is a choice. Love doesn't see color. And sometimes, even from betrayal, hope is born.